Welcome to Richard and Greg, a channel dedicated to discussion, debate and argument on a whole array of topics. Today we discuss the fact that we have passed the 2 million coronavirus infections level. We're also going to cover briefly what we see as the ongoing governmental strategy and to what extent we can trust the figures. So let's go over and listen to the discussion between myself and Greg.
Welcome to Richard and Greg. It is Wednesday, the 15th of April 2020, and we're recording this at 09:33 hours GMT plus 1. Coronavirus update. We have now reached 2 million cases worldwide. Boris Johnson, the British Prime Minister, is not only now out of intensive care, but he has actually left hospital. It appears that in some countries, the peak of the virus has been allegedly reached, and in others, we still have a little way to go. So let's get an update from, controversially, Greg, and find out what appears to be happening worldwide. Greg, good morning. How are you?
It's much too early to have looked at this stage. I shall look later in the day and see how I am. But at least I'm alive and well, with no signs of the coronavirus, despite having to go out and do shopping and the like. Apart from that, I must admit the only thing I'm much missing is socializing in one of 2 or 3 coffee bars that we frequent on a regular basis. It's quite pleasant. We live on a main road and there's very, very little traffic, I'm pleased to say, which means it's very quiet in the garden. And so we're just enjoying this beautiful sunshine. We're actually at 2,004,989 recorded cases around the world and 126,830 alleged deaths from COVID-19. 485,362 people are recorded as having recovered. 2 points on that. That still makes us over 1.5 million worldwide declared. The second point is we have no idea what recovered actually means. Nobody has been able to assure anyone that that means you can't catch it again in 3 weeks' time. Does it give you immunity for a period of time? What is that period of time likely to be? And are you still able to spread it because you've had it? All of these questions are up in the air still. We know so little about this virus. It's all very well people coming out with theories and saying that, well, if you stick goji berries in your left ear when the moon's full, you can cure it. There's always someone around making comments like that. There are various drugs that have been used historically for other diseases that people are saying are not, if not cured, cures for the disease are vaccines to some extent for the disease. However, these are totally, completely and utterly hypothetical theories, because if you get 100 people presenting with COVID-19 and it can be identified, we don't know how many different strains of COVID-19 there are, but there would definitely seem to be mild ones and much stronger ones. There is a strain of COVID-19 that doesn't primarily go for the lungs. It goes for the major organs in the body and then the lungs, and once it starts heading into the lungs, you're down to a matter of hours of life expectancy. It performs in exactly the same virus, or it seems to be exactly the same virus, is performing differently with different people. Other people are asymptomatic, don't know they've got it, have no sign of having it, but are spreading it amongst all their family, friends, acquaintances, and fellow travelers on public transport. This is a very pernicious disease because we know so little of it. If we discovered a vaccine for it today, to put it through trials to make sure that it didn't give you something even more hideous in 5 years' time would take at least 18 months. You've then got to gear up to producing it so that you can give it to the entire population of your country. Oh, no, of the world. Well, that's only 7.8 billion doses. The cost of doing that will be staggering. 7.8 billion is a very, very large number. So it is not as simple as people say. The herd immunity concept still seems the most likely. And Richard, in his introduction, said, and many countries are now claiming they're reaching the peak. Well, every major country has been doing just about everything it possibly can to avoid reaching the peak, because it knows the peak would completely and utterly overwhelm their health services. Every hospital in the country would have multiple people sharing beds. There wouldn't be enough ventilators, and a huge number of those who would present would not have access to the high quality medicine that is possible and saves lives. So every country that takes any particular interest in its people is organizing shutdowns, not to cure the disease, not to kill off the disease, but to slow its progress so that it presents patients at the health service front door at a regular, steady stream, and the aim is to suppress it to the level that the health service can cope with it. This has nothing to do with a cure. It has to do with having patients that you can give hands-on, first-class treatment to, so that they stand the very best chance of survival, especially when you realize that out of 210 countries around the world that have presented with cases amongst their population, America, for instance, with 614,246, Spain with 174,060, Italy with 162,488, France with 143,303, Germany with 132,210, and the UK with 93,000, and that will be likely to go over the 100,000 probably later today, or definitely within the next day or two. Most of those countries have now got doubling of those numbers down to from 3 days to about 7 days. So they've flattened out what would have been a peak. That means the disease will go on longer, but it does mean that the people who get it, and do bear in mind, that's up to usually a maximum of 1,000 people a day, the health service can cope with in terms of treatment. Now, all of these figures are something to be intensely skeptical of, because they do not include all sorts of sectors of the population. The homeless don't feature either as cases or as deaths, except in rare occasions. These figures only pertain to patients who have presented in hospital and or died in hospital. Britain is trying very hard to catch up and get its figures more accurate, in that it is trying to add in people who have died in nursing homes, care centres, and also in their own homes. They don't appear with any degree of accuracy on the figures. So at very least, our total deaths are 10% lower as quoted than in reality, because a further 10% of people are dying in nursing homes. The figures for people who are dying at home are far more sketchy and will be far harder to gather. Even in a year's time, when the Office of National Statistics, the ONS, is producing what should be the definitive figure, many of the death certificates will read heart attack, pneumonia, or the like, when in fact the death was directly caused by COVID-19. So beware of the figures, don't be too complacent about them. The checks that everybody talks of, that will only tell us what is happening. It will not alter what is happening.
Well, Greg, what sort of, because I'm a figures man, and the danger with figures is that there is a tendency to extrapolate the figures that you see. And if I take the United States, for example, out of a population of around 360 million, they have over 600,000 cases. They can only recognize that they have 600,000 cases because they've obviously tested.
No.
More, well, let me make this point. This is how I'm reading it. They will have tested at least 600,000 people. Now, they claim they've tested under 1% of the population, which is 3 million. So if they've tested 3 million and have 600,000 cases, which is, of those tested, they've got 20%, does this not mean that potentially 20% of the population, the remaining 20% of the population, could actually have the virus? Or is that unwieldy and inaccurate?
I don't think any form of modeling and trying to extrapolate tells us anything with any degree of accuracy. It's a means for people of a political or mathematical bent to sound as if they know what they're talking about. We haven't a clue, because without testing everybody, we never will have a clue, because many people are asymptomatic. And even if you test everybody, many cases of false positive and false negative will show up on those tests. They always do. Modeling doesn't work. And I know you'll find it irritating, but we've proved that with the modeling by the IPCC of our climate. Their decisions and extrapolations have led them to utterly erroneous and unrepeatable models that cannot be substantiated.
However, if you carry out, Greg, 3 million tests and 600,000 people have the virus, that's approximately 20%. Now, I know one can't say with any certainty that that can then be extrapolated to the remainder of the entire population. But it would not be totally unreasonable to do so, surely, because that would give us a figure potentially of 72 million people having got the virus. Or you could counter that by saying, okay, those who were tested were those showing the symptoms. And therefore, so you could only get a test if you actually showed the symptoms, i.e. you had a high fever rate or temperature rate, etc., etc., etc. So I will accept that. But clearly, you started this podcast by saying you can't really believe these figures. And what I'm saying is, not only can you not believe them, but they could potentially be so far out. You could have millions and millions and millions of people with this virus as we speak. And we are showing hundreds of thousands. Or is that alarmist? I'm not an alarmist generally, but it does make one wonder. And bearing in mind that allegedly the recovery rate appears to be quite high. So people could have had it, recovered from it, and as you've mentioned, in many cases may not even have been aware they had it in the first place.
I'm minded of Alvin Toffler's comment when he published Future Shock in the 60s. He said, people accuse me of being an alarmist. Too damn right, I'm alarmed. And I think there's every reason to be alarmed about this. I wish more people were sufficiently alarmed to obey the lockdown rules without causing problems. We got problems enough, thank you. I was talking to somebody who lives in Cardiff. He lives on a large estate, a modern one, where under British law, 20% of the housing on any new estate has to be what is termed social housing. It's to prevent the concept that has developed in America of the projects and ghettos. It's to intermingle the different social stratas in the society. But there were several families of once were travelers, few of whom seem to work legitimately, who live on the estate, and there is a West Indian extended family that lives in this social housing, and they were having a party in the street. Okay, perhaps it's a form of survival of the fittest, and those not fit enough to think this through will manage to kill each other. If that was the case, so be it. If they're stupid enough not to go along with the decision making of the society, but the problem is they will be traveling on public transport, they will be going to and fro workplaces, some of them may even be care workers or cleaners in hospitals, and they will be giving the disease to other people. A totally selfish action because they were too stupid to obey society's rules when society is very wisely trying to manage what is, for the whole of society, a disaster. And there is no doubt that this is a disaster for the whole of society. There, with 210 countries having cases presenting with the disease, 163 of those countries have recorded deaths already. And you start looking at death figures, 26,000 in America, 18,000 in Spain, 21,000 in Italy, 16,000 in France, 12,000 in the UK. That's actually the recorded ones. that could be 50% inaccurate. You could quite safely double those and be presenting with a figure that was as plausible and easy to justify as the figures I've just read out. Now, with that, that means that we are looking at a massive economic shock. The independent body that presents the figures for the British government announced last night that if this runs on so that the lockdown is around 3 months total, and it takes approximately 3 months to ease back into a normal flow of people moving about, we are looking at losing 35% of our GDP. That is a massive hit. It is, in fact, and Britain is in one of the best positions in the world to provide the data because we have a long-term belief in data. There have always been a lot of Richards around looking at figures. This will be the biggest downturn in the economy for 300 years, bigger than the Napoleonic War, bigger than the First World War, bigger than Spanish flu, bigger than the Second World War. It really is a massive downturn. The good news, however, is that same organization believes that after a couple of quarters bumping along the bottom, 1/3 down on GDP, and gross domestic product is a very good way to measure the economic viability of Britain. After that, they expect a bounce back. But that downturn will effectively have been, if it takes 2 quarters to recover from it, plus effectively 2 quarters, that's a full year down at those figures. That will hammer the value of homes. Tens of thousands of people will find they're in negative equity on their properties. Tens of thousands of businesses, small and large, will fail. We note in the middle of this has been the final straw that has pushed the clothing chain Debenhams over the edge. And they are now closing down. Off the top of my head, and I don't follow it closely, that's something like 140 stores and over 20,000 employees who have just lost their jobs. And those 20,000 employees are selling huge quantities of manufactured goods. The countries that manufacture those goods will also be losing jobs. So the knock-on effects are global just from that one largish company.
Greg, on that note, let's end this podcast. We've spent over half an hour now on this, so it's going into excessive time. Let's talk about the economic effects, because we're all in agreement. The knock-on economic effect will be absolutely substantial. Let's talk about that in another podcast, can we?
Indeed. I think we'll be talking about it for years to come.
We most certainly will. Greg, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening, and we hope you enjoyed that discussion. If you wish to help support this channel, we've placed various Amazon links in the description box below, all of which are self-explanatory, and any purchases from which we shall receive a small commission to help grow the channel further. Meanwhile, please do not forget to subscribe and press the bell sign so that you're notified of any future videos as and when they are published. In addition, we have 2 complementary channels, the first Illuminati Silver and the second Trump for President 2020. And if either of these are of interest to you, then kindly go over to those likewise and subscribe. Until next time.